America. Live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me as the Tuesday edition of Point of View. Supreme Court, of course, has come down with a number of cases related to everything from birthright citizenship to men in women's sports. The other day, of course, we talked about mail-in ballots and a number of others, so we'll certainly be talking about that in just a minute with our good friend Mike Farris. But let me just mention that since this is the last day of our fiscal year-end, we are to the very end, June 30th. The numbers I have in front of me, which don't count some of the mail came in this morning, so I'll give you a more accurate update a little bit later. But almost 200 gifts, 198, and 52,000 and counting. But the good news is, if you have been waiting to the last day, but we're hoping also that there would be a match still on the table, there is. So there's still a dollar for dollar match. And as we go through this today, we'll encourage you to do what you can to help us end this fiscal year, which ends tonight in the black. And if you can help us out, we would greatly appreciate it. Of course, you can go to the website, pointofview.net. At any point, of course, you can give us a call, 800-347-5151. We knew that not only is the end of the fiscal year, but also coming to the end of the Supreme Court. We knew there were going to be a number of really important cases, and couldn't think of a better person to talk to than our good friend Michael Farris, who is a litigator, educator, communicator. You know him, of course, as the founder of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, as well as Patrick Henry College, which is where Liberty McCarter, our co-host, went to school. He was the president and CEO of Alliance Defending Freedom, serves right now as the general counsel to the National Religious Broadcasters. We have information about that on the website. And Michael Farris, always great to have you on the program.
Thank you, Kerby. A momentous day indeed. A great number of good decisions. Some others that were a little more surprising, but really have a lot to cover today.
I would think so. We might even start with the ones that ADF was involved with, and one of those is,
sure,
can men be in sports? A case out of Idaho, one out of West Virginia, but again, explain that, because that, I think, was an important decision, even though it was hard to even get some of the liberal justices to see the value in allowing men to compete with men and women to compete with women.
Well, the Supreme Court consolidated two cases and decided them together. Both states, the legislatures there, West Virginia and Idaho, were among the 27 states that passed laws protecting men and women, but especially protecting women from injury, among other things, by saying that biological sex determines whether you can play sports. So if you're born a male, you play male sports. If you're born female, you play female sports. And so that those laws were challenged by transgender activists on the basis of the Equal Protection Clause. And the Supreme Court of the United States today held that no, indeed, the Equal Protection Clause does allow states to make those kind of common sense protections, and that the meaning of the term sex in Title IX that protects women's sports is biological sex, not sexual identity. And so those cases do not technically decide the question of whether states can go the other direction. There are cases still in the pipeline on that, whether or not California and other states like it, Washington State, are violating Title IX by letting biological males in. And so today's decision says the states that want to do the right thing, they have the freedom to do the right thing, and that the Constitution is not going to be used as a club against them to do away with common sense. Now, the second shoe will drop eventually,
yes,
and that's going to be an important thing. But this is a really good start, and their interpretation of Title IX in this case sets the stage for a good victory in those other cases, but it does not foreclose potential different outcomes. So we're very hopeful. I'm very hopeful that a good thing is going to be decided. But ADF and the attorney generals of those states and the attorney generals of the other 25 states that were involved all need to be congratulated for a job very, very well done.
Might also mention one of the other ADF cases, and it had to do with a pregnancy center, but it had more to do with whether or not you could force a pregnancy center or any 501c3 nonprofit organization, force them to disclose who their donors are. Now, I'm all about transparency, Michael, but I also recognize that there are such things as doxing and intimidation and the rest, and that was another one of those ADF cases, wasn't it?
I believe so. I'm not as familiar with. I argue when I was the president of ADF, I argued a pregnancy center case in the Supreme Court on free speech issues. And,
right.
And there was also, when I was at ADF, there was a case involving the Thomas More Society. The ADF was the lawyers for Thomas More, and we argued that the Supreme Court should protect donor privacy against the Attorney General of California.
Right.
And the pregnancy center case that went to the Supreme Court this term, I don't think it was decided today, now that I'm thinking about it for just a second, and that is a case I'm aware of. They said that the pregnancy centers can sue in federal court to protect their privacy against a phishing
right.
petition by the Attorney General of New Jersey. And so that was decided a few days ago, or maybe a week or two ago. But that was another important ADF case, yes, indeed. And,
yes.
And so the court made a good decision on there.
Yep. You were mentioning something about the importance of words, and I thought it was interesting because just a few days ago we talked about a case having to do with the Secretary of Homeland Security, and there it says this is not open to judicial review. So the Supreme Court said when it says it's not open to judicial review, that means it's not open to judicial review. But it seems to me that some of the various attorneys general around the country don't take seriously the letter of the law, and that seems to be something coming down from the court to say, and I see this with Neil Gorsuch and others saying, if you want to change it in the legislature. Don't ask us to redefine terms. And that relates, of course, even to the one about men and women's sports going all the way back to Title IX, doesn't it? Indeed. And in fact, just to show you, the argument has been raised against the Trump administration that they don't follow the rule of law. But good grief. I mean, the attorney generals, the Democratic attorney generals, made a formal public coalition. They put their names in public. It wasn't some secret deal behind closed doors. They publicly announced that they were going to come after pregnancy centers right after a case I argued in the Supreme Court for them. Yes. When I was the president of ADF, that said, leave them alone. They have the constitutional right of freedom of speech. Well, they said, we don't care. We're going to come after them anyway. And so the failure to follow the rule of law has been a particular problem with the Democratic state attorney generals. And there are allegations against the Trump administration about that, and some of them may be better than other allegations there, but nonetheless, we should see it for what it is. Neither side of the political debate takes it lying down. If they lose a case, they keep trying. Yes. Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, pick out maybe one other case or two, especially the one on birthright citizenship, which is kind of in the news, and love to get some thoughts about Michael Farris about the importance of point of view. And even as we go to a break, great time for you to call 800-347-5151.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Roger Kimball writes about the hyphen and the melting pot. It is an interesting article to read for those of us talking about the immigration and assimilation issue. He reminds us that the image of a melting pot comes from a French-born American farmer whose image of an American was one in which individuals of all nations are melted into a new race of men. Eventually, immigrants shed a previous identity to become a new one. Unfortunately, he argues, a favorite weapon of multiculturalism is the lowly hyphen. Describing oneself as African American or Mexican American is not descriptive, but deconstructive. Americans in previous generations warned us about this. Frederick Douglass, for example, was critical of such a designation. No one ideal has given rise to more oppression and persecution towards colored people of this country than which makes Africa, not America, their home. President Teddy Roosevelt warned about this in his autobiography. He said the one absolutely certain way of bringing this nation to ruin would be to permit it to become a tangled squabbling of nationalities. He then went on to warn of the destructive vogue of hyphenated Americans. The pattern of assimilation was clearly described by Justice Louis Brandeis in 1915. Americanization, he said, means that an immigrant adopts the clothes, the manners, and the customs generally prevailing here, substitutes for his mother tongue the English language, and comes into complete harmony with our ideals and aspirations and cooperates with us for their attainment. The story is very different today. We no longer require immigrants to learn the language and history of this country, and during this 250th anniversary, we should remember the wise words of Americans in previous generations. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Michael Farris with us for a few more minutes, and we'll a little bit later get into some other topics in the news. But again, as we come to the last day of our fiscal year, June 30th, this is a great opportunity for you to respond. And if you've been waiting to the last day, well, this is the last day. 1-800-347-5151. We have staff waiting to answer your phone call. And of course, you can always go to the website, pointofview.net. Michael, I guess it would be good to at least talk a little bit about birthright citizenship, what the 14th Amendment was attempting to do and how that has changed and how the court ruled. Can you give us some perspective on that?
Sure. I have to say, first of all, I didn't expect President Trump's position to prevail in the Supreme Court today.
Yes.
I thought that the change of the rule to limit birthright citizenship to those that are lawfully here is something that Congress could have done,
yes,
but that the president acting alone couldn't do. But that's very different than what happened today. What the Supreme Court said is they interpreted the phrase subject to the jurisdiction thereof, which basically says if you're born in this is the 14th Amendment.
Right.
If you're born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, then you are a citizen. And so the Supreme Court basically said today that subject to the jurisdiction thereof means that you're physically present. And so you can be here illegally, you can be here as a tourist, and you get birthright citizenship. Now, unfortunately, because it just came down this morning and I've had other things to do today, I've only been able to read the official court syllabus rather than the full court decision. And so there is at least a possibility, and I want to read the decision later, that the court could have said, well, that's the way it is for now, but Congress could change this. And under the Section 5 of the 14th Amendment, it does say that Congress has the power to enforce the provisions of the 14th Amendment by appropriate legislation. And so if there was a political will to narrow this down, then there's at least a possibility that Congress could act and change that component of the definition. But unless Congress acts and the president, whoever the president is at the time, signs that into law, there's no chance whatsoever that that's going to change. So it's, the material that you read about, assimilating to be a true American is that is very, very important. And we're not going to have a country that is truly America if we don't take the process of people saying, I really want to be a part of this country, because unlike any other country in the world, America was created on a set of ideals. And the best evidence of those ideals is both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and Bill of Rights of the United States. And if people aren't coming to this country and saying, I want to be a part of that, I share these ideals, I want to advance these ideals. If they come here and say, no, I want to replace these with Sharia law or with anything else, communism, whatever they are thinking, then they shouldn't be a part of America, because America is shared ideals. And certainly to become a citizen, that should be a requirement. And I think that one of the things is we just got to be more careful about enforcing our borders, because if anybody can just, come here as a tourist and get American citizenship, or as an illegal alien, well, the correct response is let's tighten the borders and make sure that people can come here only when it's appropriate, and not let scofflaws gain the valuable provision of American citizenship by their own unilateral acts.
What you're quoting is, for many of our listeners, they sometimes hear my commentary, or, of course, other radio stations don't even carry Point of View have it, and it was on the melting pot. And I gave at least a quote from Justice Louis Brandeis, who, again, probably was as representative back then as anyone else, that says that an immigrant adopts the clothes, the manners, even the language. And if indeed we want assimilation, if we want us to be one nation under God, that is certainly the case. And again, those issue, we'll probably later in the week get back into this whole idea of birthright citizenship, what it might mean, the mail-in ballots, which you talked about yesterday. But I thought I'd be remiss, Michael, if I didn't spend just a few minutes hearing from you about the importance of Point of View, and the importance, as we oftentimes do, of not only talking about the cases when they go to the Supreme Court, but we talk about what happens afterwards, because that's an opportunity for us to recognize that we have additional rights or opportunities or responsibilities. And that's why I encourage people right now to consider what they might do to support Point of View.
Indeed. I have been a contributing partner. In my mind, I've been a regular guest for decades now with Point of View, at least since the early 90s, and probably before that, but at least since the early 90s. And I have seen firsthand Point of View listeners make a difference in our country. The first big time I was on Point of View, there was a bill in Congress called H.R. 6 that would have devastated the homeschooling movement. And Marlon Maddox interviewed me, and the phones started ringing and ringing and ringing. And we turned that around, and Congress voted 8 days later to protect homeschooling by a vote of 422 to 1. And that was because of the broad public outcry. Now, other programs got involved, but Point of View was the first that I was on, and it started that whole process. And, having been for a number of years the president of Alliance Defending Freedom, one of the things that was important to be able to get the kind of cases that ADF has been able to take to the Supreme Court is we need people to know that there are organizations who will fight for them. I mean, the left knows that the ACLU is out there, but the people on our side of the aisle need to understand they've got people who will fight for them. And the way that information gets put out is through Christian radio, and Point of View, again, is a leader in that field, dramatically so. And so I really want to encourage all the listeners to support Point of View for a lot of reasons. There's great spiritual content, and that, of course, comes first. But the citizenship content that comes from this program is unparalleled, and there's others that do good work, but this is just simply my favorite. Long time a program to get good material to good people, so you can take appropriate action. And so this is Book of James kind of talk here is don't be just a hearer of the word, but be a doer of the word. So you come to Point of View and you hear. But then, complete the cycle and be a doer. And one of the things you can do is to make sure that lots of people can become hearers of the word. And supporting Point of View helps amplify that message, helps amplify our action, helps keeps good organizations going, and it's all around. This is a tide that lifts a number of very important boats, and I certainly just strongly encourage everybody to pick up the phone right now and call in and make a donation to Point of View. You will do. You'll feel good about it because it's the right thing to do. But you'll do your country and God's kingdom a great service if you do that.
Let me just mention, too, that we do have a link to Michael Farris. The website takes you to the National Religious Broadcasters. The Facebook page takes you to his Facebook page. And, of course, you can find out much more. We've posted quite a number of articles and resources. And, of course, we've linked to him many times. So you can type in Michael Farris on our newly revamped website, and you can find all of that. So, Michael, we've appreciated the partnership we've had with you for years. Happy 4th of July, and thank you for being with us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. God bless you.
Just before we take a break, he gave you the marching orders. It's pretty straightforward. You can go to the website, pointofview.net, and right below the pictures of our two guests, Michael Farris, and in just a few minutes we'll have Joshua Barnes, you can scroll down and see we have a banner. It says Restoring America's Godly Heritage. Click on the button that says Give Now, and as I've mentioned, we still have a significant amount of match money still on the table. Eventually it will run out, so if you've been waiting to the last day but wanted to make sure that there was still a match, it's a dollar for dollar match. Your one-time gift of $100 becomes $200. If you said, I'd like to join the Truth Team, and that is as little as $1 a day, $30 a month, or one of the limits there is $50 a month. Well, $50 a month becomes $100 a month, or again, your one-time gift of maybe $1,000 could be $2,000. I'll leave it to you to decide, but I would encourage you to go to the website, pointofview.net, click on that button that says Give Now, or better yet, since we have some individuals waiting right now by the phone, be a good chance for you to catch them very easily. The phones might get very busy later, so why don't you give us a call now as we go to a break. That number is 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. We'll take a break. We come back with Joshua Barnes. All that coming up right after this.
Today is the day, the last day to have your gift to Point of View doubled by a $94,000 matching challenge. If you care about equipping Christians around the nation to live out their faith, if you care about equipping families with tools to raise their children anchored in truth, if you care about preserving freedom for yet another generation, do something about it. Partner with a ministry that has been defending faith, family, and freedom for over 50 years. You can have an impact, especially now when your gift will be doubled. There has never been a better time to give, and we need to hear from you today. Please give now. It takes just a moment. Visit us online at pointofview.net, or you can make your gift by calling toll-free. Just takes a minute, 800-347-5151. Again, that's pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, we're going to be spending some time talking with Joshua Barnes. Let me just real quickly mention that, of course, it is our fiscal year end, June 30th, and we just have a few hours left. And so, again, I'll give you an update. I think we've gone over 200 gifts and also more closer to the $60,000 range, but still we have money on the table, still available, match money. That's a dollar for dollar match. And if you've been waiting to the last day, well, it's the last day. If you're waiting to make sure there's there's still match money on the table. It still is. Might not continue all the way through the next hour, but it is available to you at the moment. So we'd love to hear from you. And again, you can give us a call at 800-347-5151. Or if, of course, want to hear the interview we're doing right now, you can just be listening to that and just go to the website pointofview.net and be involved in that way. Joshua Barnes is somebody that certainly is very familiar to you. He's a Baptist pastor in New Hampshire. Later this summer, I'm supposed to be in New Hampshire. I'm going to see if we can get over to his church, but he has a master's degree in theology, creator of what is called the Bible Explained. And we have, of course, there's a YouTube channel. We'll also have a link to the Facebook page so you can find out some more there. Also hosted of a Christian TV and radio show called Point of View. That's a catchy title. We ought to use that ourselves. But nevertheless, Josh, it is great to have you on the program. Welcome back to Point of View.
Yeah, it's great to be here. And I had to change the name. I changed it to POV Scriptura just so that it wouldn't have the same name as the real Point of View, you know.
Well, we've only had ours for 52, 3, almost now getting up to 54 years. But yeah, well, anyway, that is kind of interesting. But nevertheless, that is one other aspect. I do encourage people to go to your YouTube channel because it really does address these issues. And one of the things that we are all about and have been about for half a century, that's hard to believe that, but I've been with it 40 years, so I guess it's that long. And yours is to really look at issues from a biblical point of view. Now, next hour, I'm going to be quoting from Jim Garrity, who refers to the fact that we have this, if you will, memorandum of understanding and calls it the memorandum of misunderstanding because time and time again, Iran has violated this peace agreement. And you write a great deal and broadcast a great deal on prophecy. And I think right now it might be helpful for just a minute to figure out, do you see any connection between what we are dealing with in the Gulf states, in particular Iran and the Middle East, and what you see in prophecy? Can you help us out with that?
Yeah, okay, so my answer would be only maybe potentially, because so my real focus is on the interpretation of Scripture. And one thing I found disturbing is that I find that almost everyone, or a large majority, it seems, of people who look at prophecy don't really think carefully about its interpretation or apply the interpretation of prophecy consistently. So when I look at prophecy, I'm not just trying to find one little tidbit that fits with today. I'm trying to look at it holistically and really interpret it as a whole. And I do find mentions in the end times about things that will happen in the East, kings from the East crossing the Euphrates River, that kind of thing. We don't know that that's Iran. We don't know how that exactly works. But there is a potential there where this could play into God. I mean, everything plays into God's eternal plan, but it could play into that end time scenario that God has. But I want to also be careful whenever we talk about those kind of things to recognize that they are, we have to hold those with kind of loose hands.
Of course,
God's doing an amazing work through the ages of history, and people east of the Euphrates River will be a part of that work. That's all I know.
Well, and one of the things I think is kind of interesting is, I've said this before, you can go back to some of the individuals that were interested in prophecy, even people like Sir Isaac Newton and others that believe there might someday be a nation of Israel. Well, now we take that for granted. This idea that a country like Iran, or which at the time was called Persia, would have some relationship with some of the other countries to the north, like Russia, that didn't even make sense. I'm old enough to remember that Russia was more involved with Egypt, and that was something that didn't seem to make sense, and now it comes to fruition. We could be still very far away from the fulfillment of some of that, but I think there is a sense in which people can be a little more excited because what before seemed incredibly hypothetical in the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, even 19th century, even the early part of the 20th century, now has come to pass. And so, if nothing else, I don't want to overplay that, but I think for people that go and see some of the things you're doing right now in the book of Revelation and others, there are some things principles that maybe help us understand where we could be much closer to the end times than before. And that brings me to another point, because you spend a fair amount of time really kind of thinking through how we would, from the Bible, develop conservative principles. And Josh, one of the big issues we're dealing with right now, and I will be dealing with that again in the next hour, and we'll be dealing with it again tomorrow, is the rise of so many individuals that believe that socialism is preferable to capitalism. And yet capitalism, you don't find that in the Bible, but certainly capitalism is based on the idea that we have freedom, the idea that we have certainly private property rights. It does seem to me that the Bible can be a very good manual to use to evaluate how we're going to vote and what kind of economic systems we're going to try to implement in the 21st century. So what about that?
Yeah, I think this is very important because theology, some people try to separate theology and politics, and I don't think they can be separated. Even in the Old Testament, the Jews are told to seek the peace of the country that they're in. We have to do that. If our theology demands a thing, we should seek that good thing for our country. And it's clear in the Bible, very clear, from the very beginning of the Bible, that personal property ownership is honoring to God. God says in the Ten Commandments, "Thou shalt not steal." Well, that assumes that I have property that someone else can't take. So I think that capitalism then is not only well-founded, it is at the foundation of the way the Bible treats governments, and that governments should be enacting God's justice according to Romans 13. Therefore, it is just for people to have their own property. It is unjust for people to take that property and redistribute it as they please. And I think that is clear. Now, people will say, well, what about the New Testament church? Didn't the New Testament church distribute things to the needy? And the answer is yes, but it was all on a voluntary basis, and it was within the church, not done by a government. Those are two very, very different things.
I might even hold up our little booklet on a biblical point of view on capitalism and socialism. And interestingly enough, I have a section here that doesn't the Bible teach socialism, because they will take you to the book of Acts, usually Acts 4. But again, as you point out, that whether you look at Ananias and Sapphira or anyone else, you can see that that was a voluntary choice, which of course is something that individuals have historically sometimes done in the Christian world. But that's very different than saying you cannot have any kind of private property rights. So running through many of your commentaries, whether you're talking about whether or not we should challenge the LGBTQ agenda, which we just talked about a little bit with Michael Farris, whether we should think about how to vote, whether we think about what conservative principles we might want to have derived from the Bible, those are important principles. And if you go back to the founding of this country, yesterday, we did an interview with Peter Lilbeck and his book on George Washington's Sacred Fire. He points out, and in the back of his book, all the times in which George Washington made comments, but because he didn't have a chapter and verse, a lot of people said, well, he must be a deist. But if you know anything about the Bible, if you're biblically literate like you are, Josh, you recognize he was quoting the Bible all the time. He just didn't give chapter and verse because he figured people already knew the Bible. And so these biblical principles were really important in the founding of this republic. I think these biblical principles should also be important in the maintenance of this republic, don't you think?
Yeah, Kerby, and this is one of the things that I really, really appreciate about the Point of View radio show and your ministry and all that you do, is that you are pointing out, you're not just making the statement that America is a Christian nation, you're pointing out the evidence for it. People will say about these deists, well, there was two deists, who signed the Declaration of Independence and so on and so forth. But deists would have Christian principles as their foundation, and they would consider themselves Christian, even though they wouldn't be Christian in a orthodox sense. They still built the country on Christian principles, and there's no denying that. That is a very, very clear point. And I think that also undergirds the importance for Christians to be conservative. Because as conservative means to conserve the country as it was founded, the country was founded as a Christian country. Therefore, to be conservative is to be Christian.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Josh. And, of course, as we go to a break, a perfect time for you, if you have not made that phone call, 800-347-5151. If you'd like to know a little bit more about Joshua Barnes, you can scroll to the website, pointofview.net. Click on a number of different links that we have provided for you. If you scroll down a little bit further, you'll come to our section, Restoring America's Godly Heritage, and a button that says Give Now. And we would encourage you to click on that as well. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Joshua Barnes with us, and I might just mention Warren Kelly came in and told us that we have passed at the $60,000 level, and that still means that there is still a significant amount of match money available. So if you've been waiting to make your gift, I would encourage you to do so. 800-347-5151. Josh, for just a minute, I thought we might just talk about your participation in our Next Generation Roundtable. We had Richard Lim on last week, and he was talking about that. Matter of fact, talked about how he's developed a really good friendship with Liberty, who is, of course, the co-host and an individual that is the leader of our Next Generation Roundtable. But the other aspect of that is I did a booklet a while back on the biblical point of view on the next generation, pulling together Barna research, Pew research we've done even at Pro Ministries here at Point of View, all sorts of places, some from Baylor, and they all say the same thing, and you know what I'm going to say. That is, the younger you are, the less likely you are to have a biblically orthodox view, and maybe the younger you are, the less likely you are to necessarily have familiarity with the Bible. So it does seem to me that your participation in the Next Generation Roundtable and your participation today is something that we need to do to maybe provide some corrective so that this next generation still has a biblical worldview that they can understand and apply to everyday life.
Yeah, and I love the Next Generation Roundtable. I love that aspect of your ministry, Kerby, that you emphasize this because it is such an important thing. Younger generations, I think, in general, are less likely to be orthodox about anything. If their parents thought it, they want to be against that. But I can see maybe hints in the younger generations today. I think you can probably see this as well, a hint of a revolution kind of back to orthodoxy that might be starting. And we saw a lot of that around the death of Charlie Kirk last year and that kind of thing. And I would hope that is a long-term thing that we might start seeing some real trends in that way. But a ministry like the Next Generation Roundtable is so helpful in that because it encourages those younger voices like my own to rise up, to speak out, and to be a part of the conversation, which they need to be. I think sometimes there can be a tendency to exclude younger generations from things where we really need to be putting them up, bringing them into it and teaching them and guiding them, bringing them along, because they have a lot of great things to contribute. Even though they tend to not be as orthodox in their thinking, they might actually bring some new perspectives and some new views. And I think in some cases we can actually benefit a lot from a fresh set of eyes looking at some of the problems in America and saying, hey, maybe we should come at this a little bit differently. Maybe we've been thinking about this wrong. Maybe we've been making too big of an emphasis on that and not enough emphasis on this. I think that's wonderful. And it's a wonderful part of why I'm a huge supporter of Point of View.
Let's begin to talk about it geographically for just a minute. As I mentioned, I'm hoping to be up there in New Hampshire. Almost every year I go to upstate New York, usually to speak at the Camp of the Woods or Word of Life. I usually go into Vermont, usually go into your state of New Hampshire. Every year I teach also in Oregon. And if you compare Oregon and Vermont, those are the two most secular states in the country where you have fewer church goers. But New Hampshire's really close to that. And you are, in a sense, understanding understanding that having a church in New Hampshire and reaching out to people in the Northeast, and of course we also reach out to people in the Northwest, in addition to, of course, the Midwest and the Bible Belt, is really important. And in some respects, that gives you a keen appreciation for how to make the case for Christianity. And that's one of the things you've tried to do in your YouTube channel, isn't it?
Yeah, that is the goal, and it is a challenge, no doubt about that. But I do think that that logic and reason is on our side by far, and so I think people can be reasoned with. A lot of people can. Some people can't be. That's true. Some people have made up their minds and just will not listen. But a lot of people will hear you out. A lot of people will give you the time of day. I think again. I'm just thinking again about our friend Charlie Kirk, who passed away. Was assassinated last year, and he championed that idea that, I think these people that others have written off and have said will not listen. I think they will. I think they can be reasoned with. Some of them can be, and we need to have that conversation. And that's why I think that if people ask me all the time, what can I do? What can I do to be a part, or what can I do to actually make a difference in America? And the thing that I like to tell them is there's a couple things. You can pray, obviously. You can listen to shows like this, like Point of View, and learn more about why you believe what you believe so that you can speak about it. You can obviously vote. You need to speak out. But there's another thing you can do. You can participate in things like this, like a drive to raise money for a show like Point of View, or to subscribe to YouTube channels and things like that. You are actually participating and being a big part of getting the word to people like that.
Well, and again, I think one of the things I would encourage people to do is go to even your Bible Explained, because there is an opportunity. I think you've got over 200 different videos, and it's easy to find on YouTube. And you understand only so well why we're doing what we're doing. We have a radio program. We have 3 different podcasts. You can follow us, of course, on everything from Facebook to YouTube. We have booklets. We have all sorts of resources. And I think you can speak to that issue. If you're going to reach your generation and the generation behind you, I think all the different aspects of media that we've been trying to develop and you're trying to develop are going to be very necessary if we're going to reach this next generation, don't you think?
Yeah, it used to be, a church would grow and they would go out and knock on doors and invite people to church. Well, it just doesn't work as well these days as it used to, especially not in New England where I am. No, the younger people aren't going to answer their doors, but they are going to get on YouTube and look up videos. They are going to go on TikTok and scroll through Reels. And so we need to be where they are, and we need to be getting the word out where they are. And so that's, again, like you said, I think that is a major focus that we need to have in our ministries, is focusing on the media where the young people are to get it to them.
Well, again, that's our vision, to reach out to the younger generation. And I only lament that because we do the Next Generation Roundtable, I just get to listen to it. I don't get to participate in it. They don't have old guys like me around there. But I certainly appreciate those of you that have participated, and certainly appreciate the fact that you have been so faithful to take some of these ideas and articulate them on the radio program. So thank you again for joining us here on Point of View, and looking forward to maybe getting a chance to see you face to face.
Yeah, I'm excited about that potential too, and praying that we can make it work out.
Well, just before I take a break, again, Josh Barnes, if you'd like to know more about him, well, we have a link, and we've already mentioned what you can find on YouTube. You can start watching those videos, and they are a little bit addictive. You'll not just watch one video. You'll probably watch another one. And there's more than 200, so it'll keep you busy for quite a while if you start watching some of his videos. But we need to, before we take a break, mention that we have crossed one of the particular parameters. That's more than $60,000. I think it's $61,000 so far, but again, the match still has about $30,000 left, and so that means that if you have been waiting till this last hour, that's just about around the corner here. So if you are thinking about making a gift, and I hope you would, because we certainly would appreciate your financial gift, especially some of you that maybe have never given before. Just even a one-time gift would be greatly appreciated. It would be a show of support. You can scroll down to, of course, the section which says Restoring America's Godly Heritage at pointofview.net. But simply as we go to the break, I'm sure the phones will be ringing, but there will be a place for you to make that call, 1-800 1-800-347-5151. 1-800-347-5151. We come back, we'll talk about the memorandum of misunderstanding, what's going on in the Middle East. We'll talk about socialists and all sorts of other issues in the news. All that coming up right after this.
Today is the day, the last day to have your gift to Point of View doubled by a $94,000 matching challenge. If you care about equipping Christians around the nation to live out their faith, if you care about equipping families with tools to raise their children anchored in truth, if you care about preserving freedom for yet another generation, do something about it. Partner with a ministry that has been defending faith, family, and freedom for over 50 years. You can have an impact, especially now when your gift will be doubled. There has never been a better time to give, and we need to hear from you today. Please give now. It takes just a moment. Visit us online at pointofview.net, or you can make your gift by calling toll-free. Just takes a minute, 800-347-5151. Again, that's pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, and again, if you would like to join with us, and I hope you would, I'll give that phone number out in just a minute. We've passed over $66,000, which now means we have less than $30,000 left on the match, and I know how that will evaporate pretty quickly. So if you've been waiting, probably a good time not to wait too much longer if indeed you want to be the person that puts us over, and we greatly appreciate those of you that have responded. Again, that number, 800-347-5151. Of course, the website is pointofview.net. Let's get into some of the issues in the news, because even though we're coming to the end of the fiscal year, even though it's the end of the Supreme Court, a lot of things will continue on. We'll be broadcasting tomorrow, the day after. By the way, we probably won't be broadcasting. Matter of fact, I know we won't be broadcasting on Friday. That's July 3rd, just because the next day is July 4th. But you will be back, of course, on July 6th on Monday. So let's get into this. And this piece by Jim Garrity actually came out yesterday, but I thought it was appropriate to focus on today, because you might remember we had this conversation for 2 consecutive Fridays, because we had Dr. Merrill Matthews with us both times talking about the Memorandum of Understanding. Well, Jim Garrity with the National Review refers to it as the Memorandum of Misunderstanding. And as we suspected, and this shouldn't be a great surprise, it's unfortunate, but it's a reality. You can't trust the Iranian government. You can't trust the mullahs. You can't trust the Revolutionary Guard. And there were many that were skeptical of this Memorandum of Understanding. And he takes you through, and I won't wear you out with all of the examples, but he gives us enough to help us understand that Iran will say something, they'll sign something, and then they'll just go about doing what they wanted to do. He starts on June 20th, and I'll take you through the end of June. That's probably more than enough. And that is on June 20th, the Iranian regime declared the Strait of Hormuz closed in response to what they call the continuous violations of ceasefire in Lebanon. Lebanon should never have been linked to it in the first place, because Lebanon has nothing to do with Iran, other than the fact that, of course, Iran has been funding the Hezbollah forces there, but nevertheless, that was their justification on June 20th. Okay, let's go another day ahead or two. June 25th, an Iranian drone struck a Singapore-flagged container ship. This is during the so-called ceasefire and the peace accord. June 26th, U.S. aircraft struck Iranian missile and drone storage locations because, again, you had that drone attack. That same day of June 26th, Iran had agreed upon signing the Memorandum of Understanding. The Islamic Republic of Iran will make arrangements using its best efforts for the safe passage of commercial vessels with no charge for 60 days only. And so they began to change some of that. And the idea was that we must establish insurance mechanisms so if incidents occur, ships that encounter problems are covered to reduce their risk. And so even there, they were changing this idea. Well, maybe we couldn't charge a toll, but, we got insurance costs and all the rest. And on that very same day, the government of Oman told European officials there's no way of going back to the pre-war status quo with the Strait of Hormuz and transiting ships that may be charged some kind of fees. Then June 27th, you have a Greek-owned tanker, which is actually registered in Panama, which was hit early in the morning. And again, this was something that was being loaded at the time in the terminal at Qatar. Then on that same day, you have the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps saying its naval and airspace forces carried out a joint missile and drone operation targeting what it described at the time of U.S. military sites in Kuwait and Bahrain. And later that day, the U.S. Central Command announced in direct response to the continued Iranian aggression against commercial shipping, U.S. military aircraft targeted Iranian military surveillance infrastructure, communication systems, air defense sites, drone storage facilities, and mine layer capabilities. By the way, this is all during, supposedly, the ceasefire and peace accord. And then on June 28th, and we'll stop there, you have a news report. Iran has no choice but to obtain a nuclear bomb to remove the military option against the country during the transition to a new world order. So all the statements that were made, all of the assurances that were given, I think we understand only so well. You cannot trust the Iranian government, even when you can find an official who represents the Iranian government. And we are not going to actually deploy ground forces. So we recognize that there are just certain limitations in what we can or cannot do in the Middle East. But nevertheless, Jim Garrity summarizes by saying, look, in the span of a little more than a week, the Iranian regime has broken just about every promise it made in the Memorandum of Understanding. And of course, you then have the back and forth, which I am concerned about. I tend to believe the vice president more than I believe the Iranians, but of course, mainstream press doesn't. Because on June 22nd, J.D. Vance, vice president, said the Iranian assets were unfrozen and that the money was going to go buy U.S. corn, wheat, and soybeans. The Iranians denied that they ever had agreed to that particular statement. We had another particular situation in which there was, according to the vice president, J.D. Vance, establishing of what was called a deconfliction cell to establish direct communications between the U.S. and the Iranian military. And again, the following day, the IRGC spokesperson said that this has not happened and it will not happen. So after a while, you get to the point, who do you believe? Well, I tend to believe the vice president more than I believe the Iranians. But I think it illustrates, again, they will say or do just about anything. They'll say what you want to hear, and they'll go and do whatever they want to do. And as we have said before, Iran has made a mockery of this Memorandum of Understanding, and it has become a memorandum of misunderstanding. If you would like to see the documentation for that, that's one of the real benefits of supporting Point of View. We post these on our website. You can scroll down to the section that has the title, the various viewpoints viewpoints and the material for the particular day. Click on Learn More. You'll scroll down and Show Materials. Everything I quote from is right there under Show Materials. And again, that's one of the reasons why I encourage you to support Point of View. We not only tell you about this, we provide the documents so that you can read them yourself. You can print them out. You can pass them on to others who might be skeptical. As we go to a break, another great time for you to make that phone call. 800-347-5151, 1-800-347-5151. Or if you're scrolling down to get some of the show materials, well, you can also scroll down just one more particular scan, and you'll come to Restoring America's Godly Heritage, a place where you can click on the button that says Give Now. So whether you give online or whether you make a phone call, we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-347-5151. We'll come back with a homework assignment right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Roger Kimball writes about the hyphen and the melting pot. It is an interesting article to read for those of us talking about the immigration and assimilation issue. He reminds us that the image of a melting pot comes from a French-born American farmer whose image of an American was one in which individuals of all nations are melted into a new race of men. Eventually, immigrants shed a previous identity to become a new one. Unfortunately, he argues, a favorite weapon of multiculturalism is the lowly hyphen. Describing oneself as African American or Mexican American is not descriptive, but deconstructive. Americans in previous generations warned us about this. Frederick Douglass, for example, was critical of such a designation. No one ideal has given rise to more oppression and persecution towards colored people of this country than which makes Africa, not America, their home. President Teddy Roosevelt warned about this in his autobiography. He said the one absolutely certain way of bringing this nation to ruin would be to permit it to become a tangled squabbling of nationalities. He then went on to warn of the destructive vogue of hyphenated Americans. The pattern of assimilation was clearly described by Justice Louis Brandeis in 1915. Americanization, he said, means that an immigrant adopts the clothes, the manners, and the customs generally prevailing here, substitutes for his mother tongue the English language, and comes into complete harmony with our ideals and aspirations and cooperates with us for their attainment. The story is very different today. We no longer require immigrants to learn the language and history of this country, and during this 250th anniversary, we should remember the wise words of Americans in previous generations. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we're going to spend some time, first of all, talking about socialism a little bit later. Colonel Alan West has given us a homework assignment. It's a pretty simple one, but I think you'll appreciate that. But first of all, we've got some articles that I would point you to, and a lot of them have to do with the issue of socialism. I'll hold up again our booklets that we've produced over the years, and even here I have the February issue of Outlook for those of you that are following along. We even have some simple tests for socialism in the piece by Socialism that Dinesh D'Souza talks about. We could talk about all the different socialist experiments that have failed and on and on. The one I want to point you to right now on our website, I just simply called it Progressives and Socialism, although the real title by Alicia Finley is Why Being Progressive is No Longer Enough on the left. And I might just say, don't you think that we are going to probably be talking about this for some time? Because tomorrow, I've already posted the articles that we'll talk about tomorrow, have a piece by Victor Davis Hanson on the New Socialist. So if you find yourself saying, I am really concerned about what's unfolding before our very eyes, those are the kinds of things that we want to react to quickly here on Point of View. And as we've mentioned before, your support makes that possible. We've actually surpassed $70,000, but again, there's still room for you to call at 800-347-5151. But Alicia Finley puts it this way, writing for the Wall Street Journal, that while people across Latin America revolt against leftist governments and are electing free market leaders. By the way, notice the irony of all this. Young urban progressives in the U.S. seek to stage a socialist revolution with the goal of taking over the Democratic Party. By the way, this has become a concern for many of the leaders in the Democratic Party, whether it's Hakeem Jeffries or Chuck Schumer, or even people that are no longer leaders but were at some time. There are some that have actually started saying, you have these different candidates who were endorsed by the Democratic Socialist of America. 9 of the 10 won primaries either for the state legislature or Congress. There's another good piece out by John Fund about what's going on in Colorado right now. And all insurgent mayor cases, all those that were actually, I should say, backed by the insurgent mayor Zoran Mamdani, those prevailed. And I think for a minute, this article helps you understand how much more radical they are. Because let's take a good example. The other day I mentioned the one in the 10th Congressional District, but they opened first with the one of the 7th Congressional District. And the individual actually backed by Mayor Zoran Mamdani, is Claire Valdez. And she defeated the president of the Brooklyn Borough, Antonio Reynoso, who, interestingly enough, had the support of the Attorney General, Letitia James, had the support of the city council members, even the union-led Working Families Party. He was an individual that you might remember backed Medicare for All. That's Bernie Sanders' particular area. Called for the abolishing of immigration and customs enforcement. In other words, wanted to call for the abolition of ICE. And he even favored a wealth tax, which in some respects was even broader and maybe even, as they said, more punitive than the one Bernie Sanders proposed on billionaires. So if you want to talk about somebody who had the leftist creed or street cred, if you want to put it that way, in the Democratic Party, he had it. And yet, interestingly enough, he actually also agreed with Zoran Mamdani in terms of some of the concerns that they raised about Israel and genocide, the word they use all the time. But here's where he got himself in trouble, if you will, because he said, maybe we should tone down maybe some of the anti-Semitism we're seeing in the city. Well, that provided an opportunity to say he's so leftist and so progressive, but Claire Valdez is even more so. And so you are now starting to see individuals that are so far to the left, there hardly seems to be any room any further to the left of those individuals. But nevertheless, this was an opportunity for her to jump in and talk about globalizing the Intifada. Some of the people that supported her were waving Hamas flags, Hezbollah flags, and the rest. And so the only real difference, if you will, is she just differed with him on the degree of militancy. She's worked in Columbia University's Visual Arts Department and has served as a union organizer and all the rest. But that, interestingly enough, was just enough for her to defeat an individual who has been in Congress for many years and is very far to the left, but found some position to be even more radical, more leftist, more of a democratic socialist than him. Now, the other one, of course, you might mention, we've mentioned before, Abelia Chevalier, who was in the 10th Congressional District. And I can't even say on the air some of the things she's posted, but think of swear words. She also referred to Joe Biden as a war criminal, which he found out the other day when he spoke. Did you see that when he was speaking in Boone, in Delaware, and the rest? And so the bottom line is that the question that Alicia Finley is asking is, why is this happening? And she says, well, recent college graduates inculcated in Marxism have grown disenchanted with the flaccid democratic establishment. They were attracted to Zohran Mamdani and those surrounding him for the same reason, she says, Republicans were drawn to Donald Trump in 2016. They're tired of mealy-mouthed politicians and want somebody who fights. And so as a result, then she goes in to talk about some others. Hassan Piker, who we've mentioned before, who has, of course, made quite a living out of decrying the United States, capitalism in videos and YouTube and Amazon's Twitch and all the rest. But they point out that if you look at all these individuals running right now, and they have Los Angeles mayor, 1st Congressional District there in Colorado, the Senate seat in Michigan, besides Marxist ideology, she says, one thing many of them have in common is many of them are children of immigrants. And so regardless of their background, they all graduated from college. Some obtain multiple degrees. They have assimilated all too well to the culture of academia and the big cities, and they, in a sense, exemplify what is happening. You know, my commentary today is about assimilation, but we're talking about assimilating into American society. Many of these individuals, unfortunately, have assimilated into leftist politics on major universities. And that is one of the reasons why I'll hold it up again. The reason we produce these booklets on socialism, capitalism, the road to serfdom, that's why we are producing and will continue to produce the Outlook magazine. The one this month actually is Understanding America's Christian Heritage. We need to get this information out. And if you indeed believe that that is something that we need to do, we almost need a relearning of America. We need a re-education of America. We need to come back, as we mentioned with Josh Barnes, to have some conservative ideas, to conserve some of the things in the past that made America great. At a time when we're seeing more and more young people actually calling for a socialist revolution. I don't know how I can make the case any stronger for the need to support Point of View or any other organization that is fighting for faith, family, and freedom. So as we go to the break, let's again see if we can hear from some of you. We're kind of whittling away what's left of our match. So if you would want to still take advantage of that, you can give us a call. That number is 800-347-5151. 1-800-347-5151. And when we come back, I do want to maybe give you a homework assignment. This comes from our good friend Colonel Alan West, because he says, you know, it would be good for all of us to read the Declaration of Independence. One of the things we've been making available is this copy of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, still making that available to you. And he also gives us a little bit of a history lesson, which was news to me. So again, we want to educate all of us, and I learned some things by reading his piece. And then we'll talk about America's universal aspiration, all of which, again, remind us that as we're coming closer to the July 4th, this opportunity to once again celebrate 250 years, but to learn from our history and apply it as we're going forward. So again, one last time, give us a call, 800 800-347-5151. And go to the website, find the section which again is entitled Restoring America's Godly Heritage. Click on that button that says Give Now. I'll give you an update before the end of the program. Let's take a break. We'll be back right after this.
Today is the day, the last day to have your gift to Point of View doubled by a $94,000 matching challenge. If you care about equipping Christians around the nation to live out their faith, if you care about equipping families with tools to raise their children anchored in truth, if you care about preserving freedom for yet another generation, do something about it. Partner with a ministry that has been defending faith, family, and freedom for over 50 years. You can have an impact, especially now when your gift will be doubled. There has never been a better time to give, and we need to hear from you today. Please give now. It takes just a moment. Visit us online at pointofview.net, or you can make your gift by calling toll-free. Just takes a minute, 800-347-5151. Again, that's pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join with us, and I hope that you will. I've given you that number, 800-347-5151. Just got this a minute ago. More than 76,000 has come in, which means just a very small amount is still available on the match, but there is still some available. Now, again, some of the questions that people oftentimes ask is, well, could it still be available to us later? Well, we'll see what we can come up with in that regard, but I know some of you are like my wife and I. Sometimes we tend to be old school. We'll write out a check, put it in envelope, and we'll take it to the post office, and it has June 30th on the postmark, and that counts as well, so we'll count some of that. And, of course, I know that a few of you even listen to this later in the evening because some of the radio stations play it later. You could still call in. And so, again, I just want to encourage you to participate. And, again, I don't think any gift is too small. Any gift is too large. We've had a couple large gifts. We've had some small ones and everything in between. 800-347-5151. I thought we would, for just a minute, give you a homework assignment, and this one doesn't come from me. It comes from Colonel Alan West. It is our third article, and he says, yes, I know that school is out for the summer. He said, okay, sorry, Alice Cooper, I just had to use your line. That was a good line there, but nevertheless, he says he's been recently visiting up there in New England, and I was just talking about Josh Barnes. Maybe I'll be up there. As a matter of fact, I know we will be. And he talks about when he was in Rhode Island, something I was not aware of. I've lived in Connecticut. I've really studied American history, but I was unaware of the attack on the HMS Gaspee, which was a schooner that ran aground in June of 1772 while chasing, interestingly enough, a colonial ship. And as a result, there was a local merchant, John Brown, no relation to the guy at Harper's Ferry, he said, but had a raiding party of patriots that went out on longboats, attacked, burned, and destroyed this British ship. Now, the point is, this was 2 years after the Boston Massacre, about 3 years before the Battle of Lexington. So he says when you speak to people in Rhode Island, they feel the claim of the first shot of American independence really belongs to them, not the Battle of Concord and Lexington. I thought that was kind of interesting, and I did not know much about the Gaspee raid and, of course, the attack on the HMS Gaspee. But he was making the point that, again, we need to study Americans' history. history. He's going to, in just a minute, encourage you to read the Declaration of Independence. Here is the booklet that we made available a few months ago, A Biblical View on the Declaration, and we've talked about that before. This book, which is more recently one that we made available on A Biblical View on America's Founding, which is really pretty much based on a very good book by Mark David Hall, who's been on the program before on a number of occasions. His book, which came out many years ago, Did America Have a Christian Founding? And of course, we quote some of the other books that we've done interviews on over the years, and that is the case. So he points out that if nothing else, one of the concerns he had as he was traveling through New England is that when he was there, even though it's the 250th anniversary of our independence, he says, and I'm quoting him now, I saw more rainbow flags in New England than American flags. And so he goes through some of the stories about that. But he also gives us another history lesson, which I've talked about before in one of my other booklets. I won't hold all those up, but there is one where we talk about how in many cases you can see some cycles in history. And he says, if you think about this, the story of America really didn't begin on July 4th, 1776. He says he really thinks it began, if you were really going to be honest, October 31st, 1517. What is that? Well, that's where Martin Luther nailed the 95 Theses on the Wittenberg door, in church door there, and he presented his officially titled Disputation on the Power and Efficacy of Indulgences, which was really a challenge to the Catholic clergy, in which they were charging individuals, parishioners, for the absolution of their sins. And it was his premise that Jesus had gone to the cross. His sacrifice was enough for our sins, was sufficient for our sins. It was not necessary to have another intercessor, and it certainly was not necessary for individuals to be charged for that. And so the point he makes is that, as we sometimes even point out in this book on the Declaration, some of these ideas predate 1776, because the next thing he talks about is something that happened later, and that was the writing of John Locke. Now, if you are familiar with Thomas Jefferson, he made it very clear that the Declaration was not presenting new ideas. He was taking the ideas and the concepts at the time and explaining why they were going to declare their independence from England. And one of those very significant arguments was the argument of John Locke, who in his second treatise of government in 1689 would argue that it was not just our spiritual freedom, but also our earthly freedoms that were endowed to us from our Judeo-Christian faith heritage of a Creator God. Does that sound familiar? Of course. We are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That quote, all the way back to 1689, is the idea that was espoused by John Locke. He goes on to point out that the nation was based in large part on what's called natural rights theory, which comes from John Locke. And Jefferson began to invoke Locke as the father of kind of classical, what was called at that time liberalism. That's come to mean something different now. And so whether you look at Luther or Locke, you can see that many of those ideas all come to us today. And so here's his homework assignment. You have to go through the first couple of pages, and on the fourth page, he says, I really would encourage you to do this, and I would agree. Read the entire Declaration of Independence. And as you read it, might even read it to your children and grandchildren, you're going to notice something, because it lists all these usurpations that come from the king. And here, in some respects, that is reminiscent of some of the indulgences and other concerns that go all the way back to Martin Luther, and of course, even to some of the writings of John Locke. And so, in some respects, he says, here we're 250 years later, we're still dealing with one of those issues, taxation without representation. I've often jokingly said, if we ever could meet up with the founders in heaven, I might say, if you thought taxation without representation was bad, you should have seen taxation with representation, because that's the world we are in today. And then reminds us that, we are owing a debt of gratitude to Martin Luther, to John Locke, but also then adds one other, the great spiritual awakening through people like George Whitefield is one that he mentions, and we could certainly mention some others because we recognize how instrumental all of those were in giving us the Declaration of Independence, the American Revolution, and ultimately our Constitution. Ends with, of course, a very famous quote from Alexander Fraser Tytler: "A democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist until voters discover that they can vote themselves largesse from the public treasury." And then, of course, talks about the different cycles of history. And if you are unfamiliar with that, we have a booklet, A Biblical Point of View on the Cycles of History, that remind us that even as we are today celebrating 250 years, we recognize that if we're going to continue those principles that were essential to founding this republic are also the principles that are necessary for the maintenance of this republic. But let's take a break. When we come back, I want to come back to one other piece, America's universal aspiration, what we hope to actually aspire to in the future, how we have been able to correct many of the sins and flaws, but there's still more work to do, and that's, of course, what we'll be talking about here on Point of View. But as we go to our break, last time I checked, we were up at 76,000. I'm pretty sure we're getting close to 80,000, but there's still match on the table. So if you have been wanting to join with us, we're down to the last day, the last segment, and so a good time to make that phone call. 1-800-347-5151, 1-800-347-5151. Of course, at any time, you can go to the website, pointofview.net. Lots of great resources we are making available to you. Take the time to print some of these out, the ones I've been quoting from, and also stop by the button that says Give Now, and we would love to hear from you. Let's take a break. Some final comments right after this.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention as a program note that tomorrow, going to spend some time talking with our good friend Tim McGrew, The Book of Us, Discovering Ourselves in the Story of the Bible. And so I think you will appreciate that conversation as well. Last article here is America's Universal Aspiration. And I thought I'd just mention real quickly that one of the things he starts with are some of the concerns of what Barack Obama said at the opening of his presidential library, because what he was pointing out is that the aspiration of the founders was that we wouldn't be perfect, but we would strive for perfection. And I think it is really amazing. He goes on to talk about how James Q. Wilson is an individual that actually talked about this idea of universal aspiration, in which we wanted to, in a sense, give people fair treatment. And in some respects, people failed to really understand that the genius, he says, of the founders wasn't in enabling their descendants to fix their mistakes. Rather, it was to fashion a system that strived to be righteous in the first place. America is not great because its founders provided us with a framework that allows each generation to make our union more perfect. It is great because our founders even thought that a more perfect union was possible. It's a really encouraging piece. It starts out with some of the negative comments by Barack Obama, but it ends by reminding us that we should be grateful for the nation that we have. And hasn't this World Cup been such an encouragement? Time and time again, we see people coming to this country and saying, I had no idea there was so much abundance. I had no idea there was so much freedom. And in some respects, maybe we've taken so much of it for granted. So on this 4th of July coming coming up, we should be celebrating with this nation that we have inherited and strive to do what we can to continue that in the future. But I thought, just as we are winding down the last day of our fiscal year end, I thought it would be good to bring in the president of Point of View, Warren Kelly. So how are we doing?
We're getting there. We're coming along. So let me first pause for a minute and say thank you to all of those of you that have given. You have no idea how much your gifts mean to us, and they really do make a difference for the future of our nation. But we've had $77,000 that's come in, which means we've got about $17,000 that still needs to come in to meet the match. So as Kerby has been saying, if you've been waiting till the last minute, well, we've got about 6 of them left before the show ends, and this is the last show of our fiscal year. And let me encourage you, there are a lot of opportunities that we have ahead of us, things that we could do that would make a tremendous difference for the future of our nation. And I would really like to have a board meeting next month where we were able to present a really solid financial statement that shows that we have the resources to move ahead with those things and not have to decide which ones we cannot do because we didn't have quite enough come in. So please, if you haven't given yet, let me encourage you to be very generous in your support, and please let us hear from you before the end of the day.
People have heard me more than once mention the fact that we have a reformatted website,
yes.
And that is one of the things that we've spent in the past because of the faithful givers that are out there. But we also have an app that's going to be showing up pretty soon, and a few other things. We have 3 different podcasts. I've held up a couple of times today, booklets, outlooks, all sorts of other issues. But give us a sense, because really people wonder, well, what are you doing? You're just a radio program, but we're a whole lot more than a radio program, aren't we?
More than that, yes. And if you have been looking at our social media, you've seen that it has really moved ahead by big jumps, not little steps, but big jumps. And we have, again, the opportunity to really take that to the next level. And maybe even a couple 3 levels, but we do need some resources to do that. So your money does help pay for the radio program, yes, but there's also all the booklets, the Outlook magazines, the printed publications, the online publications. Kerby puts so much content on the website every single day, and it's all great content that will help you build your biblical worldview. So these are the things that you're giving to. These are the things that you're investing in, and it will make a difference as we do all the things that we're working on for reaching that next generation of Americans to see our nation turn back toward those biblical values.
You know, Mike Farris was with us, and Michael Farris is not looking for something to do.
No.
Yeah. When you talk about a guy that was the founder of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, the founder of the Patrick Henry College, served as the president and CEO of Alliance Defending Freedom from 2017 to 2022, and as the general counsel for National Religious Broadcasters, he's not looking for something to do, but he came on specifically because he remembers fondly, even decades ago, as he pointed out, and It was trying to figure out how many decades we go back. I think we go back to the 1980s. I first met him in early 1980 because we're in the same Sunday school class there at McLean Bible Church years ago, and when he was just getting started. But the bottom line is that he was wanting to encourage people to give because he has seen the positive impact that Point of View has had.
Yes, he talked about the H.R. 6, the bill that was going to shut down homeschooling. He was kind of underselling that a little bit, as it really would have basically banned homeschooling. It would have made it impossible for anyone to homeschool their children, and would have made it very difficult to send your children to a private Christian school. And I think also kind of undersold the response, because Marlon gave the phone number out. Dick Armey was on with him to talk about that, then House Majority Leader. And the phones lit up so big at Congress, they had never seen anything like that, to borrow from President Trump. It was amazing how many, they literally shut down the switchboard for 3 days. We had congressmen that were calling and begging us to ask our people to quit calling. And it was not until they got rid of that bill that they finally stopped calling.
So again, as we have just a few more minutes left, let's just mention that even though we're going off the air, we still have people that will be answering the phone. Is that correct? And they can, of course, go to the website, pointofview.net. For some, I just said there are some that, like my wife and I, sometimes old school, we like to write out a check. And if we write out a check and put it in an envelope and get it postmarked today, you'll count that, and we will give an update probably next week because we'll have to wait for some of the mail to come in, right?
Yes. Well, I hope that we see a tremendous response and that we can give you a really great update tomorrow, but it may be a few days, like they said, as we wait for all the mail to come in. But again, we really do need to hear from you, and today is the last day, and there is still match money on the table for a little while longer. So if you want to have your gift matched, please give us a call, go online, and do it right away.
And again, our goal is larger than the match. So first of all, we're trying to hit the match, but some people might say, well, can I still give? Because our goal is something that I think we could achieve by maybe one or two people out there that have the capacity and the ability to give a larger gift, because big gifts do add up very quickly, and that would be helpful to us as well.
It would. We have set an ambitious goal, but in honor of our country's 250th birthday, we have a goal of $250,000, and we have had $177,000 come in toward that. So we've still got about $70,000 that we need to reach that goal. So yes, your gifts still are needed and will make a difference.
Well, we're going to take a break, and then tomorrow we'll come back and we'll try to give you a preliminary answer to the question, but probably won't know all of that for another few days. But I hope that you've appreciated the conversation here today. Mike Farris certainly did a great job of promoting it. So did Joshua Barnes, and those are just two of many people that we have on the program on a pretty regular basis. But let me mention one last time, if you would like to make a phone call and you can't do it this second, well, then just write down 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. If you can't call this moment and call a little bit later, we'll still try to answer those phone calls. If you go to the website, pointofview.net, click on that red button that says Give Now, and that is a great opportunity. It has been a privilege, of course, to do this program for now up to 40 years I've been doing this, and I hope that you have appreciated it as well. Most importantly, I want to thank Megan for help engineering the program. Steve, thank you for producing the program. Warren, thank you for being in here. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
Today is the day, the last day to have your gift to Point of View doubled by a $94,000 matching challenge. If you care about equipping Christians around the nation to live out their faith, if you care about equipping families with tools to raise their children anchored in truth, if you care about preserving freedom for yet another generation, do something about it. Partner with a ministry that has been defending faith, family, and freedom for over 50 years. You can have an impact, especially now when your gift will be doubled. There has never been a better time to give, and we need to hear from you today. Please give now. It takes just a moment. Visit us online at pointofview.net. Or you can make your gift by calling toll-free. Just takes a minute, 800-347-5151. Again, that's pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.